Welcome to the Columbus, Ohio Real Estate Show. I'm your host, Ryan Dieter with Key Realty.
And I'm Omar with Spring Garden Lending.
Whether you're looking to make a move, invest, or just want to stay informed, we hope you find this show useful for your real estate journey here in Columbus. We got a great show for you today. Again, bringing Omar back into the mix here to bring us up to speed on a topic that he has been kind of, I guess, diving into the last year, as he's been on the committee for the rezoning project here in Columbus, Ohio. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to ask him some questions about his experience, but also his opinions and thoughts on the new zoning code that happened here in Columbus. If you're not familiar with that, Columbus updated their zoning regulations here for development along the major corridors. And that's going to help, mostly with, mixed units, commercial spaces, apartment complexes, things like that. So mostly the commercial world, but it's going to obviously impact the residential world as well, especially if you live along one of those corridors like I do. So Omar, jump into your kind of overview of what the city did and all that fun stuff.
Well, yeah, so, I think we're both, city regional planning nerds, and this is just kind of a topic that we're both interested in. It aligns really closely with development, and we all know that Columbus has been growing in population and dealing with the challenges of that growth, right? So you're going to have tons of people moving in. Where do you put them?
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that we have equitable growth and we want to have density where it makes sense. And that will relieve the pressure on density in areas that it doesn't make sense. And so Columbus has not updated their zoning code in 70 years.
Just wow.
And yeah, and so um, no time like the present to
Yeah.
modernize our zoning code.
Yeah. Things
And
have changed
so
a little bit in the last 70 years. Just saying.
a little bit. And so what has happened in between has been kind of a patchwork of neighborhood plans and zoning code changes within certain um, corridors or that
Okay.
kind of thing. But nothing has
Yeah.
been done in a comprehensive
Yeah.
manner um, throughout the.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think it took so long?
I think it was just kind of the status quo and um,
Getting the city to agree on a major thing like that, I guess.
yeah, don't rock the boat. We can manage, and it just became unmanageable,
Yeah,
especially with the growth that we're having now.
interesting. Okay. Now you were on the committee, so they made formed a committee to get this passed, and or tell me more about that.
Correct. So one of the first things they said was say we're not going to just kind of make this decision without community input. And so I was one of the people that they asked to sit on the zoning committee, which was able to kind of review step by step as they were going through the process. They had an outside consultant that was actually doing the work. And a big component was community outreach and make sure that the community was well aware of the changes that were being were being done and providing an outlet for the community uh, to voice either their concerns or how we could improve the process. And uh, they they did a number of outreach events at different rec
Yeah.
centers and community events. Went to festivals. They were really out there just trying to get the word out about we're making some changes here and you should be aware of that and we'd like to hear from you about how we can do it the best way we can. um, and for the most part the input that they got from the community has been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, that's great. So tell us a little bit about the differences about where it was and kind of what they're proposing for the new change. And it's already been passed. This is already done. I know this is
This is
kind of
it.
already kind of old, a little bit of old news. This happened, over the fall, late summer, fall. Correct me.
Correct.
Yeah, around that time, and it was obviously a big deal here in Columbus. Um, but I think it's relevant to kind of as we start, thinking about the future, obviously to have this conversation. And so I wanted to kind of just have Omar do a real quick recap of, kind of the changes that were proposed.
Yeah. And I think the best way to do that is to kind of just show you
Yeah, yeah,
on a map. And so hopefully this will work. I'm not
yeah.
sure if you see the map.
I've got it pulled up.
All right, and
So yeah, if you're listening,
you're
you're gonna have
able
to
to see.
just there. If
Yeah,
you Google,
I'm sharing the map.
yeah,
Yeah.
Google Columbus's, zone in new proposed or new map of the corridors, you'll kind of see
Yep.
this map's gray, gray with blue lines that are showing
Hmm.
us redeveloping and the
I
corridors that
think that's
we're talking about.
yeah, I think that's the map that best articulates the changes
Yeah.
and kind of highlights the major corridors. And so if you see North High Street is being upzoned, uh, logical, right? That just makes sense. South High Street is also being upzoned.
Yeah.
Parsons Avenue, Livingston. These are major corridors. These are super wide streets, probably too wide. Like West Broad Street is like a football field in width, and it just has so much opportunity in terms of being a multimodal street. And that is exactly why they have chosen these corridors to create density because these are the major corridors. They're already busy streets anyway.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and make sure that we have the density where the busiest traffic is. And this is also coinciding with bus rapid transit. So a levy was passed by
Yes.
CODA to introduce bus rapid transit. So in addition to adding the density, right, which is creating the demand for rapid transit, um, they're they're including the rapid transit itself, right? So it's kind of like chicken and egg. Which one do you start with first? And they said, let's do both. And so the zoning development will happen later, but the bus rapid transit will be coming on pretty quickly. So I think the first line that's going to go in is West Broad Street.
Okay.
And that's going to connect the suburbs to downtown on West Broad Street. It'll have a dedicated line. It'll have a frequency of every 5 minutes. You'll see a bus at your stop at your terminal, and it'll
Wow.
look very similar to um, light rail.
Okay.
So each station will have kind of some signage, electronic signage that tells you the bus will be here in 2 minutes, and it actually will be there in 2 minutes because it has its own dedicated line.
Yeah.
Um, and introducing the transit along with the density will allow for people to have less reliance on a car. You might still have to have a car, but you might not need two cars for every family or something like that.
Yeah.
And what this will do is reintroduce housing typologies that worked well before we had the car. And that's what most people are really, gravitating towards right now. You see new developments, new communities being built in a way that is walkable. That is what the
Yeah.
demand is. And obviously, as a realtor, that that is a high demand thing for a lot of people. It's like I
Yeah.
just want to be able to not be forced to drive everywhere if I can.
Yeah.
And so, including, and this is also great for business as well, because when you have more foot traffic, retail businesses do better as well.
For sure. So update us kind of where, it makes sense with the rapid transit. I think that's, to think these corridors alongside that. Obviously, the zone change is just, a piece of paper that they sign saying, hey, the zoning's changed. Now developers can
Exactly.
come in or people that want to develop can come in and have less, just more ability to build, I guess, up to today's standards and find ways to make it. Yeah, I'm assuming they're taller, and I know they're going up taller. But tell us kind of what the difference is in between the old code and new code, the major bullet points of that is.
Yeah. Excellent question, because I think people, especially when you become a little bit alarmist, you might worry that you're going to have a high rise on every corner, and that's not the case. I think that in some of these
Mm.
areas, the parcel depth of the property is going to dictate how high you
Mm.
can go.
Okay.
So, uh, an example is Sullivan Avenue. So we're upzoning Sullivan, but
Yeah.
the parcels on Sullivan are so shallow that you're not going to be able to build that high and really make sense. It's also a more narrow street. So the parcel depth on Sullivan, the zoning code height restrictions are lower than the height restrictions are on either Broad or High Street.
Okay. So there's
And so,
difference. So you're saying there's a difference between every spot here. It's not every spot got the exact same,
yes,
it's not a blanket statement. All these corridors get the same exact regulations. Okay, interesting.
yeah. So you'll see probably a housing typology on Sullivan that's going to probably be more of like maybe some row houses, maybe 3-story walk-ups, that kind of thing,
Okay.
and probably some setbacks. And so you're going to have more of a neighborhood feel on Sullivan where um, you're just switching out a single family home to uh, a multi-unit, but it's going to look and feel like um, a neighborhood. It's not going to look
Yeah.
like downtown.
Yeah, we actually,
Whereas
I mean,
down,
I think
Mhm.
that's one thing Columbus really lacks is smaller multifamily newer builds. They're out there, but they're just, yeah, I think compared to a lot of other cities, we don't see a ton of, duplexes, triplexes, or even, under 10. I feel like you either have a single family high-end house or you have a massive, apartment complex going up and very few and far between. And so that's great that there's, hopefully
Yeah.
encouraging that along these corridors.
Well, and I would categorize that what you're describing as medium density,
Yeah.
right? And so there's low density, medium density, and then high density.
Yeah.
And in some of these corridors, you're going to see some high density, and it makes sense in that area. And then some areas, there's just going to be medium density. I think most of it's going to be medium density, but what I would categorize as low density is all the things that are not highlighted in blue here, right? The city of Columbus is in that gray,
Yeah.
kind of
Which is,
almost I
is
call it
another
Swiss
it's another
cheese.
topic for another day, is just how
Yeah,
Columbus City is broken up to. If you're not familiar with
yeah,
this
and
map,
all those areas are
yeah.
are zoned R1, which is residential one. See these are areas that are just you can only build a single family home with a certain setback. Um, and what this is going to do, these major corridors where you're going to align transit with the upzoning is going to reduce the pressure to build densely in these areas that are already zoned R1.
Hmm.
And so it's the best of both worlds.
So say you want to build a duplex. I guess is duplex considered single family still or R1?
It's considered a multi-unit, so
So
it
so
is
you would have
not,
to get a
you
variance
would,
to build
correct,
in those gray areas. What you're saying, you
correct.
have to get permission just to, and you may or may not get it. So it's hard to, if that's your target if that's your kind of end game, it's hard to start that unless you have a variance, which makes density very hard to build in
However, you will benefit if you are buying an R1 zone property as a single family and you're near one of these major corridors are going to bring density, which is going to bring more foot traffic, which is going to bring
yeah,
more amenities. So now you have amenities that are walking distance to your home and you don't
yeah,
have to use your car there. So
yeah,
and you have access to mass transit that comes every 5 minutes.
yeah.
So I think it's a win-win for everybody, and I'm really excited about it. Let's talk about what I don't like.
Yes, let's do that.
So for the most part, I'm encouraging everybody to support this. It's already done, it's passed, and you'll see it um, in a very gradual way. The development is not going to happen. It's not going to be like the floodgates are going to open and everybody's going
I mean,
to
I
keep
mean, we've already
developing.
seen this for almost 6 months now, and I'm not seeing any new cranes coming up. And
Right.
I live 4, 5 houses off High Street. And so I've not seen the cranes in my street in my neighborhood quite yet.
No.
So,
Yes.
this is,
However,
yeah,
when you do see it, what it's going to look like is that if the person builds according to what the new zoning limits are, you're not going to see them at your area commission. You're not going to see them at the community center because they don't need a variance.
yeah,
That's what this will do. This will allow people to cut through the red tape. It usually takes about 9 months of pre-development just to get a project permitted and encumbered and ready to go.
yeah,
And now that's going to shrink that time. And we need that. We need the
yeah,
speed to get people to and reduce the cost for development in these areas, especially for that mid rise. Because if you are building a high rise, you could afford to spend 9 months getting your pre-development going and fighting battles at area commission.
that's it. Yeah,
But if you're doing
if you have a
a
lot of capital
duplex,
too, yeah,
yeah, but if you're doing a duplex or a three-story walk-up, the cost to fight these battles is too high for it to make sense.
yeah,
So then you just get either extreme. You get something that just stays within the bounds of the old zoning code, or something that is ridiculously outside of the scope of what we want as a community.
yeah. That's a good
Because
point.
now,
And
yeah,
it deters, newer developers or younger, people that, or people that don't have quite as much capital behind them to take a risk, because it is a very big risk when you could go, almost a year, like you said, and get told no. And that's a lot of money up front for that. Yeah.
and those smaller and medium-sized developers are the ones that are local. And so we want those
Yeah. Yeah.
investors to invest in their local
Yeah.
community because they have a stake in it. They
Yeah.
have a sense of pride in the quality of the work they do, and their wealth generation stays within the community. So they're spending their money in the community. Whereas if you have an out-of-state developer coming in and building something, and then
It's
those
just,
royalties come back to them, or those returns come back to them, it's probably going to be in New York, and so
yeah, it's
that
just all about
is
the ROI at that
extractionary.
point. Yeah. It's all about the
What
bottom dollar, and that's all they care about.
and where do we want our community dollars to stay? We don't
Yeah.
want them to be extracted out of state. So just many more reasons why we should encourage small and medium-sized developers to invest in communities and corridors
Yeah.
that are accessible to them. But back to
Yeah.
what I don't like.
Yeah.
So
Tell us more about what the limitations are.
I have a minor critique,
Okay.
and it is that if you look at the map, it is mostly hub and spoke model, where all these corridors are leading into downtown, which is the major employment center for the city, which is fine.
Yeah.
However, let's say you're on Morse Road, you live on Morse Road, and you need to get to Bethel Road. Well, you have to hop on the bus rapid transit, go down to downtown, and then catch a connector there, and then go back up, you know, ONTNG route and getting to the Bethel Road.
Yeah, no, the map
So
shows a line going from Morris to Bethel. Obviously, we know that Morris and Bethel actually don't connect because there's
yeah,
no connection. So they're not doing bus rapid transit there, I assume.
right. Nor are they making a connection on Worthington on 161
Okay.
or on Hudson or anywhere else. And so what I was encouraging people to do is think about density in terms of crosstown connections,
Mm.
and and tying that into the mobility plan. And what I've seen in Chicago, which is my personal experience, is that when you have this hub and spoke, you're never going to let somebody get comfortable with letting go of their vehicle because they they will need it in order to get to work across town, and this all of this money will not solve their problem. Um, and so it's a chicken and egg situation again, where what do you start with? Do you start with the transit or do you start with the density? And in my
Yeah.
mind, we had an excellent opportunity to encourage density in some sort of crosstown way, to allow for the transit to come later and make a business plan for introducing bus rapid transit on the crosstown sections of the city, especially in the north side. So that is my deep in the
Yeah.
weeds critique. But
Yeah.
overall, I was happy with the experience.
Yeah. Do you think this was enough? I guess is the question. Do they and is there more coming?
Yes, there is more coming,
Okay.
but
Do
I
you
think that more coming in terms of bringing the community along, doing it the right way, making sure people are well aware of the benefits and costs, and so it won't happen by dictate. Um, I think the city does a really good job of getting people on board. And Columbus is known for being extra practical with these kind of things. We're not first movers on any of this,
yeah.
but what I'm hoping for is that Columbus follows the lead of cities like Minneapolis, where eventually we will be able to have ADUs in
Yeah.
of these single family homes that have these large lots where people want to age in place, and the bedrooms are on the upstairs, and how do we encourage small cottages, so that people can age in place, or generate extra income,
Yeah.
or all kinds of things that you can do when you have the ability to rezone the whole city and allow for multiple.
So that was that not part of the new zoning? No, okay. I knew
Nope, they
I
really
heard
just
whispers of
focused
that
on the
coming.
major corridors. Yeah,
Okay.
this newest release was just the major corridors, which makes sense,
Yeah.
especially because they really needed to do it because the levy was passed for Coda.
Yeah.
But more to come.
Yeah, and then I guess people that are afraid, have you had any pushback? Did you hear people like being afraid of, the NIMBYs not in my backyard? Was that a big deal here as you were going through this process, or not
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 really.
not really?
And
Okay.
I think it's just people um, get bent out of shape when they actually see structures going up.
Yeah.
They don't really. This
Huh.
is so conceptual
Yeah.
that and deep in the weeds that I don't think people really realize what this potentially could do to change the whole look and feel of our communities.
Yeah, no, I guess as an investor, thinking investor mindset, or even a homeowner looking to buy in an area, how do you think this will impact? Do you think this will have I know that will this have an impact on values? Will this have an impact on, will it, kind of saturate the market more, or will it actually help? Do you think it will actually help create, more value to the residents that are already there?
It all depends on Columbus's growth trajectory. I think
Yeah.
that we've been underbuilding in Columbus for more than a decade. So that's why you're seeing um, middle class people struggling finding suitable housing for their families, either to buy or rent.
Yeah.
And that's going to continue if we continue to underbuild. If we left these major corridors at the current zoning code, we would have only been able to add 6,000 units. And now I think we're going to be able to add like 80,000 units.
Oh,
I could
wow.
be wrong, but it's
Yeah.
it's a substantial amount of more units that are allowable if every developer just builds up to what the limits are on the new zoning code. And 6,000 was not going to do it for
Do you
us. I mean,
know,
we're
do you know what?
behind so far on inventory of housing units.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Do you know what the limits are? How high, how high? And I know you said it was different for per area, but what's the
Yeah.
tallest,
No, there's certain sections are like limits are 10 stories, and
okay.
others like Sullivan Avenue, the limit's like
Okay.
stories.
Like up to 10. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, it's not including downtown. Downtown had its own, you can see that's not a part of that. So you can still
Yeah,
do high
actually, there's
rises
a
and stuff
minimum
downtown.
height on downtown.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
zoning is
Yeah.
encouraged so much in downtown that
Yeah.
if you wanted to build a 3-story building in downtown, they would not approve it. They would
Hmm.
say 10 or more.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would say one last thing I'll say is that I'm excited about, and I think maybe some people could be worried about, is they eliminated minimum zoning requirements. I'm sorry, minimum parking.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
they
I know
they
that's been a
eliminated minimum
huge headache for
parking.
developers.
Yeah, before this zoning came in, uh, you had to park each unit uh, two times over, and if you had a garage, each parking spot is about $20,000.
Yeah.
And so if you needed to park your development, uh, it became so cost prohibitive.
Yeah,
And
I think
yeah,
Columbus was just afraid, with that regulation. Obviously we were a car city, and Columbus is
mhm.
afraid of, being forcing people to hey, like it's going to be a little bit of a pain if you have two cars and you live in the city versus not. So, yeah, and you start having that pain, people start saying, well, it's hard to find parking, it's hard you know, to make it work. Maybe I just get rid of a car, and eventually that happens, and people start realizing you can live without a car, and all of a sudden it
Yeah,
becomes, you have to make that leap if you want to be a big city. I mean, every big city has that problem. And at some point, you got to say, okay, we are a big city, and if you want to live in the city, you can't have two,
yes.
three cars, and or if you do, it's going to be a little bit of a headache, and that's okay.
We're not going to mandate how many
Yeah.
parking spots a developer has.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that developers aren't going to build
Yeah,
parking.
obviously if you build an apartment complex and you can't park on it and you have a car, it's going to be, it's going to be part of your decision to rent there, and that's part of the
Right.
ROI factor. So,
So no
yeah,
developer is going to
yeah,
not park their
yeah,
development, but they're going to make their own assessment on what the market
yeah,
will bear and what the demand is for parking in that area, and they're going to make that their own assessment. And if they don't do it well,
yeah.
then they won't be able to rent their space.
Yeah, and I
So
knew a couple cool developments that I was really excited about that kind of got squashed, and because of the parking issue. And it's like
mhm.
these are businesses that want to start something, but they got told they had to have so much parking that it didn't make sense. Or they
Well,
just
and
space they wanted to use wasn't, like, they couldn't do it, and so they had to say, okay, we can't do our project, and that's unfortunate.
one thing is that those minimum parking requirements were the same across the board for every
Yeah,
type of
yeah,
developer. So,
every
for
area.
example, if you were an affordable housing developer and you were building densely, you
Yeah.
still had to park your community,
Mhm.
and you know that your clients or your tenants actually don't have a car, but the zoning requires you to park
Mm,
it even
yeah,
though your tenant doesn't have a car.
yeah, that's rough.
So
Yeah, it
so
makes
now
which
you
makes the
just
whole thing more
doubled the
expensive, which means,
cost.
yeah,
Exactly. You doubled the cost of the development, which means that the development now requires a higher amount of subsidy, which is tax dollars, our money, going in to subsidize a building with a parking lot that isn't being used because none of the tenants actually have cars.
yeah, or they have to rent to a higher demographic,
Right. So
to make
that's
money.
another, one of those things that I'm encouraged
Yeah,
about
that's
is
great.
that now affordable housing developers will be able to right size the amount of parking. They'll still have parking, but they'll right size the amount of
Yeah.
parking, which will allow for them to build more units, which will reduce the amount of subsidy that they will have in
Mm.
order to make those projects pencil
Few
out.
less tax breaks, all that fun stuff down the road, hopefully. Yeah. Same.
Yeah, we're being overall, more efficient with our tax
Yeah.
dollars, which is great.
Well, this has been great. I know I've read a lot about this, a little, not a lot. I've read some about this. I've been hearing a lot about it. It's been good to do a deep dive with you for my own personal knowledge. Hopefully, the audience, whether you're on a podcast or joining us video here on YouTube, have appreciated this. Of course, reach out to us if you have any other questions. You want to have a more of a conversation, more in depth. You want to know a little bit more about this. You want to know where to find if you're living in a certain corridor, you want to know where to find what the limits are there. Reach out to us. We'll be happy to share that information with you too. Um, Omar, thanks for joining us and bringing the knowledge today.
Awesome. I had a great time. I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
talk about this all day.
yeah. We'll be back for more. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying this. We'll be back for more. Um, news or kind of just updates here in the Columbus, Ohio region. But thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.